Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge.
Hi! This episode is about remote working, how it's mainstream now and how that matters, how to embrace and incorporate remote and distributed work as an employer, how to be well prepared and well positioned and productive going forward as a remote worker or employee. To discuss the opportunities and challenges of remote working, I'm delighted to be speaking with Maya Middlemiss, founder of Remote Work Europe and a veteran remote work strategist. Maya's new book, Remote Readiness for Jobseekers, adds to her extensive work on remote and distributed work. Hi, Maya. How are you?
I'm well, Sophie. It's really good to see you. I'm looking forward to this.
I start with the beginning. You studied psychology.
Yes.
Why so?
I think it was just wanting to understand people, and it sounded interesting. I didn't go to uni straight away. I worked for a while and travelled. But it seemed to me at the time, I think the least boring thing. That sounds very negative, but I'll be honest about my mindset in my early 20s. Right. It was like, yes, almost pick something, see if I could get in despite not having a very traditional academic qualification route at that point. And maybe I thought it would help me understand myself better as well as other people.
And did it?
Oh, good question. I'm sure it did. I enjoyed the experience then. I mean, this is going back to a time where you actually had some financial support and, you could enjoy yourself as a student without as much pressure and getting into debt and things as today's cohort facing. Because some of my traveling I'd done had been very much in the voluntary sector and trying to support different missions and things, I was very clear that I wanted to work in the third sector then, in the charitable sector. And psychology definitely helped orient me towards that, which is why I started off in community development way back when.
With your first jobs after college, you are already in support and training and with people. Obviously seems quite a logical choice based on some of the pre-university experiences that you had. Why was that the next step? And then you go on to found your own company, research company, which is an interesting progression.
I was working in different voluntary organisations. Then I worked in a university doing what we called equal opportunities work. Then something slightly unexpected happening was finding out I was expecting a millennium baby, we called it then, which is sounds like a total cliche. No, it just happened that way. But that did change my life somewhat radically. And I had thought I would carry on at the university, but through conversations whilst I was on maternity leave, I ended up going to work with a family friend, and together she wanted to set up a supplier to her research agency. And it was a new way of doing a traditional service. It was going to be using scary new technology. No one knew it was going to catch on or not. It was called the internet. So it was all very suspicious. Will this actually work? And so she needed some sort of plausible deniability with her existing suppliers, some distance if it didn't work. And I was really interested in finding ways to deliver this service. Didn't want to commute into their plush offices in central London. And so the whole thing was, well, could we do this if somebody worked from home? And obviously at the turn of the millennium, that was a big deal. It was really unusual. And so it involved lots of big beige boxes, lots of cabling, a new phone line in my house. At that time, we still had to unplug the phone and plug in the internet to phone somebody to say, I've sent you an email. But that was how it happened, basically. That was how I ended up working from home. I also had this newborn, and I couldn't begin to wrap my head around how people managed to organise their lives and their days and take the baby somewhere and deal with that separation anxiety and then go and work in another place. For me, I've always worked from home since the day I became a parent.
When you start at the very, very beginning, what were the key things that you learned at that time, obviously very different scenario in some respects because nobody else was having to deal with it. But it then put a huge onus on you to make it work. What were some of your, first steps, if you can remember them, about how to make that work so that you could set this all up for success?
Yes. I mean, at first it was just me and on the phone a lot to the parent company and visiting them. I lived in the suburbs of London at the time. So as soon as, the baby was old enough to leave with an au pair for a few hours, I could go to meetings or drag them with me if it was an all-day thing. And I think that, when we initially formed the partnership, it was very experimental. I think we thought that if it all worked out, we'd probably rent an office in a couple of years.
Right.
And instead, the first person I hired was somebody who coincidentally turned out to live quite near to me. We just advertised in London. She came to my house to train. But then after that, she was really interested in carrying on working from her home. So she said, well, why do we have to rent somewhere together? Can I do it the way you do it? And so we thought, well, actually, there's probably no reason why not. We can share files over. I think we had an ISDN line then, so it was a little bit faster.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We're just sending spreadsheets backwards and forwards. We didn't have a server or anything. And I thought, okay, this works. And that means I can train sort of one person at a time in my home office and a spare desk, and then sort of push them out the door once they get sufficiently independent to have their own setup, and we'll just cable up their house. And so we carried on growing from there. And I think it was very much a kind of like attracts like things, that once people knew how we were working, they were attracted to that
right,
as much as the role itself. We even ended up hiring within couples and things occasionally, because if one person was getting up and going out to get the tube into London and the other one was lazily making another coffee and flicking on their laptop,
like, hey, hang on a second.
I want a bit of that. Yeah, so it grew quite organically that way.
Right.
But obviously I didn't have any playbook for managing the team, managing the technology, for hiring, what to look for.
Well, but you were designing it, right? I mean,
yeah.
With we call it a playbook now, but you were building up a series of habits that were what worked for you.
Yes, I made a lot of mistakes. I had to learn as I went along. The one thing I definitely couldn't use as a hiring criteria was having worked remotely before, because nobody had done that. Except there were one or two people I hired who had been self-employed before, who were entrepreneurs. And that actually worked really well, because it was very independent, sort of managing fieldwork projects. I needed people who could think on their feet, who could solve problems, who didn't have to call to me to figure stuff out.
So you were already asking questions in the interview in terms of trying to, if they hadn't been self-employed before, what were the things that you were looking for?
Yeah,
you began to realize were indicators of success in this fully remote and not amazingly technologically convenient ways of working.
Yes, I mean, it was almost like looking for clues through the CV and the cover letter. I hired somebody who'd written a novel. Now, that meant that they could go and pursue something completely independent, that they could structure their time, that they'd done that around a full-time job, travel, people who'd not just done the usual kind of gap year routine, but people who'd done something a little bit more self-directed, longer term. I hired somebody who'd run a marathon. And obviously the rest of the CV fit, but that stood out to me that, I know from experience, not personal, I hasten to add, but that's a good 6 months of planning, training, organising your time, getting up when it's cold and dark in the UK.
Separate, and determined singular pursuit, yes.
And moving through stuff that hurts to get a result.
Okay, nice way to put it.
But that was somebody who worked out really well as a project manager. I knew that they could just take something, follow a program, set it up and run with it. Those were the kind of horoscope clues that I was seeking in a CV from someone who'd never worked remotely. And obviously there was no such thing as a formula for remote readiness then, because we hadn't even had COVID then. Most people had never done it. Most people were still in the, that would never work where I work, or, that would never work for me.
From my experience, having been in this space since 2011, 2012, and, there was actually a lot of flexibility. Callie Yost Williams explained to me that, in fact, 90% of companies actually had a flexible working policy. It was either hidden, not used, not encouraged, squashed, all those type of things. But they were there. But there was certainly a lot of flexibility about being able to work in a slightly different way from, the really constructed, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. As there was more understanding of being able to work differently prior to the pandemic, and the desires, particularly of millennials who were coming in, getting, their smartphones post 2009, kind of like, we have all these different ways to be mobile. What can we do, or why aren't we able to work differently? What were you seeing pre-pandemic in terms of greater interest and use of this type of flexibility?
That's such an interesting question, because obviously there are still large numbers of people who think remote work was invented almost exactly 6 years ago. When the first lockdowns happened. But of course, that's not the case. I moved on from the research agency in sort of 2016, 2017, and I ended up writing freelance journalism, mostly around technology and with a specialism in collaboration tech, because that was my sweet spot, obviously. Yep. And it was very clear even then that these trends were building. The technology was basically solved 10 years ago. Right. It's improving all the time, the connectivity, the size of the devices, the always on, everything being cloud-based. Back in the early days, we were sending each other copies of spreadsheets and updating them and changing the file names. And then we had them all on a server, so we checked them out and checked them back in again. And that was a bit clunky, and you got versioning errors. But by the time everything was cloud-based, and now we're all just anonymous animals commenting away in our documents and so on. That just means you literally can be anywhere. Now we have devices that mean you can be anywhere. We have, certainly in most of the more developed world, we have 5G connectivity, which means you're not paying by the second for data. Yes. You can actually go in and do stuff. All of these things were converging very steadily. None of that changed in 2020. That was already there.
To just go to that point of tech collaboration, distributed collaboration, because, it does go to so many of the sort of stalwarts of being in the office. It's like you have to be in person to collaborate. There's obviously lots of research that now proves otherwise. How about what you are finding worked in terms of that, a collaboration, protocols and process to make that effective, so that you could be effective in everything that you were doing?
I would say that over the last 10 years, not much has changed in terms of the overall structure. Everybody needs a place for stuff, for assets, for documents, for wikis, for whether it's a repository or a file server or whatever you call it. Then people need a synchronous communication layer over that, usually whether that's a Slack chat, some people are using WhatsApp, used to be Skype, but obviously that's gone away now. Some corporates have gone down the Microsoft route. Everybody else is on Slack or Twist if they're really cool and async. So it's differentiated, but even back then people had a way to chat to each other. I mean, my first team used MSN Messenger, and we were really excited to get Skype when that came along, because it felt much more business-like. But we needed to chat just to know that people were there, even if you were working asynchronously and doing deep work. Then obviously the video stuff came along, so that meant that we could do a call without it freezing or breaking too much. Again, it's table stakes now. Let's hop on a Zoom. Let's do a WhatsApp call or a FaceTime. We don't think about it. And to be honest, that's got as good as I think it can ever get now. This is just, obviously we're recording now, but in terms of our immediate communication experience in this moment, there's you and me, we're looking at ourselves on a screen. We have no lag, we have no interruption. It's very easy to forget we're not in the same room. I don't think this is going to get better.
There are holograms, that 3D virtual presencing, which allows a 3D hologram, is available. I mean, it's very expensive, probably uses a huge amount of bandwidth, which may be exactly what you and I want to do in the future, whereas sometimes maybe not, because
and the same we might just have a voice call. It depends on what
exactly
what our needs are.
We know obviously huge change has happened because of the pandemic starting in 2020, accelerating in sort of implementation of technologies, really, step change in how people viewed what was possible, how productivity did not fall off a cliff, the opposite. How were you experiencing that in terms of people suddenly being in your world and experiencing, from very different perspectives, what you had known for so long? And how did that change how you thought about it and what you saw as being the possibilities going forward?
I love this conversation because you're taking me back in time to these different moments, from being a new mum to now sort of fast forwarding to 2020, I suppose. At that time, well, prior to that, I'd been 2 strands of freelance work, journalism and consulting. So the work I was doing with teams at the time was very much about a slow, considered change management process. We might be interested in this one team thinking about working from home. Let's do another pilot and let's review that. And let's, because none of these things can be rushed, obviously, until that day when it was just everybody grab a laptop and go home. We'll figure it out as we go along.
Right.
So that was one strand of it. The other side was the journalism, which was mostly around unified communications and collaboration. And that exploded suddenly. So I was really busy. And, while I had lots of friends who were suddenly not doing anything at all, people who were furloughed, people who were very concerned about their income and everything else, and is the world going to fall apart? And then there were other friends who were trying to do their normal jobs, but from home suddenly, with often working for people who were very senior managers who had never managed people who weren't in their direct line of sight. Had absolutely no clue. They were burned out. They were stressed. They were trying to homeschool at the same time and manage all of that, which was a complete disaster.
Yeah.
So they were doing that. Then they were being expected to be on Zooms all day long because the person they were working for needed to kind of eyeball them to believe in it. And then, can you come to this pasta making happy hour after work when you get the kids to bed? I mean, no wonder there were lots of people who was saying to me, this is what you mean by remote work. I hate it. This is a disaster. Yes, okay, the technology is there to make it so, but when am I supposed to actually do my work for a start? Because my manager wants me on a call all day with him because he doesn't know what to do. It was so lots of people had a horrendous experience. And yet, still coming out of that, I had people saying to me, I can see the potential here that if I wasn't trying to homeschool and if the world wasn't dying of a pandemic, and maybe if I could leave my house, maybe if I could control my time and my environment and my workflow a little bit more, I could make this work. And my manager cannot say to me now that it doesn't work for our team or it doesn't work for me. I've proved that I could do this. And how about if I changed this and if I wasn't in lockdown and so on? How do I make this permanent? Because they're saying we'll have to go back next month. And so I had a lot of people asking me that. And so that was how Remote Work Europe came about. It was Remote Work Spain initially, because I had people messaging me saying, how do I get a job where I can carry on like this? How do I persuade my manager that I don't want to come back to the office? I don't want to get back on the commute. And then I saw people posting in Facebook groups and, in asking the wrong thing in the wrong way in the wrong place.
I had erroneously thought that, the hybrid issue would be around for maybe a year because there was going to be sort of some tension. But of course, the flexibility was what businesses needed. And so, people need to have that flexibility in Europe, in the UK, in Spain and broader. What were some of the things that were driving them and then proposing it in the wrong way that you needed to help correct, and sort of how has that evolved in positive and some negative ways?
I think for a lot of people that period, even if they could see everything that was going wrong work-wise, was a real existential pause to reflect and think about what they wanted.
Yeah.
And a lot of people did move. They relocated. The UK talked about the phenomenon of Zoom towns experiencing a renaissance, like the coastal towns, which were very badly affected demographically by migration to the cities, were starting to see a wave of people who were just realizing they didn't have to commute, or even if for hybrid, they could maybe handle an hour and a half on a train twice a week, not 5 times a week, and starting to see that. And people were realizing the upside of it as we came out of lockdown, and they could step outside their homes and remind themselves where they lived and see what was in their community and on their doorstep, or choose to make that doorstep somewhere completely different where they'd always maybe thought they'd have to retire one day, but actually I could go and live there now. And so all of that was really powerful. But then once the organizations moved beyond the hybrid from a purely hygiene hot desking, we could only have so many people in the building at a time, and started to move back to decisions at a team level, where we want this team to be on site, or this manager isn't comfortable with that because they're not sure what their job is anymore if you're not there. And there was a lot of that kind of pressure. So I saw people quite panicking because they designed their lives around this shift, because we're talking a good year or two into it now. People were talking about this is the new normal. People who'd got a dog or something, because of this whole lifestyle shift, and suddenly being told, well, no, we want you back 5 days a week. And of course, that was a disaster for them. And so I was starting to see people making quite panicky, desperate shouts for help in social media. And does anyone know a job where I can work from home? And does anybody know anybody? And here's my CV. And I started to make the same answers to the same people, or the same emails and direct messages. And because I've always been a kind of system person and a documentation person, I thought, this is getting silly. I need to pull these people together, have this conversation in one place. So that was how Remote Work Spain came about as a Facebook group. And that was about 4 years ago.
The largest companies are typically the ones who have the most days in the office. And predominantly, the small and medium-sized businesses are more flexible, have more flexible arrangements, incorporating remote working in many different, much more thoughtful ways. Where do you see that we are now in terms of how the employers and employees or freelancers, contractors, the growing population of fractional and contract workers, and how the work is coming together and how it is distributed?
It's really difficult to answer, because I feel this post-truth world applies to all the information and noise that we're getting about how companies are working now. There's return to office mandates. That was the big CEOs, and it was the fact that CEO was being put on the spot for a soundbite about their productivity, or there's something to mention on an earnings call. Yes, we're bringing everybody back in because we're going to focus and we're going to grow. And there's no tangible link with that and productivity or the bottom line. Right. In fact, there's an awful lot of evidence to the contrary about how productive. We don't.
Well, there might be a big shiny office that the person wanted to fill.
Absolutely, and that's got a 10-year lease on it, and actually, their corporate treasury or the CEO's pension fund is also heavily exposed to commercial real estate, maybe.
Right.
There were all these kind of factors in the background that don't really play into whether the marketing team is more productive if they're all sitting in cubicles next to each other versus living where they're happy and contented and fulfilled and don't waste an hour and a half on a train each day. So when we want to make the case, we can do so. We can draw on research. But most of my experience is a lot more anecdotal. It's with people trying to make it work on an individual or a team level. And they're very clear about the alignment between personal preference and productivity.
Yep.
And it's kind of obvious, really, when you think, do you want people to be where they're happiest? Do you want people to be where they're contented or where they're motivated? Or do you want to drag them to somewhere they're not, to sit next to each other and do the work, which is 99% digital anyway?
I found the pandemic to be very interesting in the discovery of people about how they work best. They'd never known that they did or didn't like being work well in an office because they'd never had an alternative. And so it was really like, oh, so this sort of self-awareness, which we need in all kinds of other ways, working in very, very different ways, need to be much more self-directed. But that self-awareness really, really helped people understand whether they might be great fully remote workers or prefer to have some kind of a hybrid going into the office. What were some of those epiphanies and increases in self-awareness that people both needed and had, learning about themselves in order to be more effective choosing the remote working path?
I think this lifestyle forces you to look at things that it was very easy to take for granted before. I can't count the number of people who told me, I could never work from home. I couldn't get motivated. I couldn't. It's like, what do you do at the weekends? Do you just stay in bed all day?
Really? Okay.
Because it's like
No, I work actually all weekend as well.
It's like people say, I could never work with my partner. Whereas an awful lot of people during lockdown had to do just that, an awful lot of self-employed people. But people used to say just these things that they didn't really examine. It was just something, I could never do that. It's just easier when you've never actually had to examine that to go with it. And once you do get forced to work from home, some people will find that belief reinforced. Fine, great, can't wait to get back to the office. But others, it turned their world upside down when they realised, actually, I quite like this. There's a lot to like here. Or maybe if I changed this layout of the house and got the kids back to school, that I could really make this work. Or maybe I want to go and live in another town, or maybe I want to be a digital nomad, or all these things start to unlock. And then you have to ask yourself all these other questions. Well, what kind of lifestyle do I want? What kind of education do I want for my children? Do I want to take them with me and world school and travel? Because all these other things is you just send your kids to the school that you're in the catchment area of because that's the place you live, and you had the choice of where you could commute to the place that somebody else said you had to work. And it's all these things domino from the way we earn a living. And once you decouple that from a particular location, it can be quite overwhelming. I've done individual coaching work with people through my Clarity Day offering, which is often we end up thinking through things like kids' school or what political environment do I want to raise my family in or build towards retirement in. And so, because once you disconnect the work from a location, you literally have the whole world at your feet. And that's overwhelming and huge.
Is it more younger people wanting to set themselves up to take advantage of all the different aspects of technology and all the things that we've developed over time and not have to be tethered, because it doesn't make any sense? And also older folks who may be sort of like, okay, now I can do this differently. Now I want to travel more. Where are you seeing the pull and maybe the emphasis, and also maybe some different aspects that people are considering that are more surprising to you because of, you've been doing it for so long and they're only just new to it?
I do find I've done more with people my sort of age. I think, again, it's because all these possibilities are opening up, which for people of our sort of Gen X cohort who had normal jobs and careers, they probably know what to expect from this bit too. Whereas if people have been more complicated freelance portfolio careers, or they've traveled a bit, they're aware that there are lots of different possibilities now. There are people whose work has disappeared since COVID, since various reshuffles. There are people who've faced redundancy, not for the first time in their life, but in the past it's always been easy to hop onto the next thing. And now suddenly it isn't. But what they can maybe explore is some geoarbitrage, move to somewhere where the cost of living are lower, where you're not constrained to stay in a commuter belt.
I love that. Geoarbitrage.
If you don't have to live in the suburbs of London or New York, you can actually reduce your living costs massively.
Absolutely.
And just do a couple of days a week consulting, or a non-exec position, or do a bit of freelancing. There might be ways that you can leverage your lifestyle and design that against the need to be in a particular place, in a particular time zone even. So it's
right. So that then offers all kinds of different possibilities for people at different points in their career arc. We're post-pandemic now, we're in a still stable state. Now it's the new normal. And it incorporates much more remote working, sort of looking at Nick Bloom's graph. It would have been continuing on this trajectory because it started before the pandemic and now we're on, but we're just sort of at a higher level. How are you advising employers or helping workers connect with or identify the employers with whom that they can really have a productive working relationship, who understand, how to incorporate and work well with and manage distributed teams?
There is still an awful lot of very experienced senior management leadership people who've never had to deal with this. Right. And I think it's very easy for those of us who are in this remote space to evangelize all the time. And it's important that we do step back and acknowledge this is hard.
Yeah.
It's much harder to make it work. There are lots of things that happen organically, osmotically when you're together, like cascading learning, like shifting culture. Things like that are much easier to do when people are sat next to each other. That doesn't mean you can't do it the remote way, and it doesn't mean it's worth it.
Right. But I will say, Maya, honestly, that whole apprenticeship and osmosis, it was fudged, it wasn't deliberate, it wasn't clear, and that was why it had to happen next to somebody next door to each other, because the manager didn't actually know what they did or how
they didn't know what their colleague did.
And they didn't have a playbook and they didn't know how they worked and they hadn't designed anything. So it was like, just watch me and you'll work it out. So, which I think is extremely inefficient.
Yeah, but it worked as it was workable for decades because nobody wrote this stuff down. You only wrote the legal stuff down.
Correct.
Like your incredibly complicated flexible work policy. This is your core hours and you could take this much time and you owe these fractions but nobody wrote down what do we do, how do we do it, what's our decision tree, and so on. It's much easier to do that now. We can do it with AI, we can keep things updated, we can distribute it, we can search it when that is really recent, that we don't have to kind of search manually through things and really classify and tag everything. We can actually surface that knowledge when we need it. So it's definitely much better to do it because the remote way is the intentional way. Just like being intentional personally about where you live and how you live and so on. Yeah. In the workplace, you have to get intentional when you write your communications protocol, when you specify your tech stack and its parameters, and you even things like your digital nomad protocol. People are like, well, we don't need a digital nomad protocol because we're just remote workers. We don't let people. Well, actually, you do because you just don't know it. And, unless you're doing very particular kinds of tech sweeps on their IPs and so on, you have no idea. I mean, I often joke that when I started out with my remote team and we first got Zoom with digital backgrounds, we all used to Photoshop in our tropical beaches behind us.
I saw that cool. In your book. Yes, he was like, no, don't put that there now.
Now it's the other way around. I think people are photoshopping in, a suburban co-working near the office or something because they're actually on the beach in Bali. They don't want their employer to know because that's completely outside their employment contract.
Or makes the other person feel that they're not going to be doing a good job because they couldn't possibly be doing a good job if they were that environment. What are the ways to position yourself to be effective in finding those kind of remote jobs, understanding, as I said before, the companies that are open to this, their leaders and managers learning how to, successfully include great talent, which is all over the world. Raj Chowdhury and his working from anywhere. You have to be able to identify them and understand, who they are, how there's, what's the fit. And you mentioned in your book, your new book about cultural fit and why that's outdated. Definitely would like you to comment on that. You also talked about your remote console and how making systems part of your identity. Please explain those two things. Workers and employees understanding how to be working efficiently, coming in and out of full-time remote work, going into hybrid work, all those different things. We need to be setting ourselves up differently period.
We do. And technology is a core part of that. We couldn't work this way without the technological environment that we have. But console is only one of the 5 C's in my model.
Yes. Okay,
it's interesting.
Those are your 5 C's, please.
Well, okay. I mean, it's interesting because quite often when clients come to me or potential clients, the presenting problem is a tech one. They think they haven't got the right app for meetings because stuff is falling away or not getting actioned, or are we using the right virtual phone network and so on. And generally that's the thing they think is wrong, but it's not, which is really interesting. So the 5 C's model emerged from trying to systematize all the work I've ever done with teams and recognize because every team's unique, every job is unique, every output is unique. And yet when things go wrong, they tend to fall under certain recognizable categories. And that means that you can set things up to go right by looking at those categories in the first place. So I ended up with the 5 C's model, which is console, culture, communication, connection, and collaboration. The console includes the 5G waves in the air. It includes your mobile device. It includes even things like smart notebooks, your remarkable pad. For some people like to combine the analog and digital. But I feel in terms of remote readiness for job seekers, it's a very important one to prove. Not that we all have to be tech experts, but we have to it's like a hygiene factor. Your technology has to be at a certain level, because if you've only ever worked in an office environment where you have an IT department down the hall, every time your printer jams or the thing won't switch on, you need the confidence to do that. Or you need to be able to deal with your blue screen of death or your dead device.
Yeah, and troubleshoot.
If your Wi-Fi falls over, you need to get it to a point that IT can remote in anyway.
And or, have backup solutions, know where the co-working spaces are that you can go. Working from home is not remote work. It is working from wherever you might be and wherever you choose to be. And so, having the sort of slew of different solutions that you need in different scenarios is very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Just knowing what you can put your hands on quickly if your connection falls over. It's good to have all these different redundancies.
In all of that, in your role, sort of helping people understand how to be better remote employees, remote contractors, part of that is likely to be how to be helping their manager in the office or not be a better distributed team manager. How do those sort of nudges happen for employees to be helping, making suggestions to improve distributed managers? Because I think they are struggling. Can team members really be offering some helpful advice, and is that what you recommend?
I think everybody's got a role. I think in today's workforce, hierarchies are a lot more flattened. The sheer spectrum of knowledge and expertise is much broader. And so everybody can't know everything.
Sure.
I sometimes wish I was born like 200 years ago or something in a world where the average educated, well, I suppose it would be a man with a patron, but you could know all the things about everything. You could know all about history and art and astronomy and all these things. It doesn't work now. We are so much more atomized now. We need to try to be good synthesists and have a good overview. But I think it's perfectly realistic that your manager might not be an expert in remote document use, for example. So it can be appropriate to model and suggest. We cover in the book the first 90 days because that's part of the recruitment process. It usually involves some formal trial period anyway before people hand out a solid employment contract to someone they may never have met. So it's very important that hopefully there's some structured onboarding process on that side for you to work through. But it's legitimate to contribute to that and, to question it, to respond to it, to engage with it, to show that you're showing up. I mean, definitely encourage people to be not like, oh, here's my onboarding stuff. I'll just quietly work through that and tick it off locally, to get in the habit of observing what the communication cadence is in the team and finding your place in it, even if that's just checking in with people, finding those moments for those get to know you chats, trying to make sure those aren't knowledge transfer events, because that should be off. That should be asynchronous. That should be documented. But there might be things you need to circle back to. By the way, I left some comments in that document because there were one or two things that weren't clear to me. We could discuss that on our call, but if it makes more sense, please reply in the thread, because you're hiring more people. And, that for me as a newbie, that wasn't clear, and I'm sure it will be soon. And to look for little places where you can, without friction or confrontation, slide in little bits of making life easier for the next person who's onboarding. And actually, ideally, they should be directly soliciting you to do that, because as a new person, you have a perspective on the way things are done that nobody else has. And sometimes you can see things, and sometimes you might think, well, actually, I don't understand what's being asked of me here. I need a bit more time just to get my head around this, and I don't want to put my head on the block and make a stupid sounding suggestion that of course everybody who's been here a year knows that you don't do it like that, or we tried that and it didn't work, and we didn't write down all the reasons it didn't work because that wasn't necessary, but it's very easy to revisit that, and maybe they need to just strengthen the rationale behind a particular procedure or protocol a little bit more. It's all doable. And I think if the communication flow is there, there'll be a way to do that in a way that's not disruptive, or it's not breaking into deep work, it's not breaking in a synchronous flow. But then when somebody looks back at that onboarding process, they can say, oh, okay, yeah, well, evidently that wasn't clear. Or they had these two possible responses here, and they said, should I do A or should I do B? Not what should I do, because that is less actionable and it's harder to respond to asynchronously. So there are lots of things people can do.
Just reading some interesting data coming out of LinkedIn, which said that 66% of recruiters say it is harder to find the right people that they need using AI even. I know that on the other side, for prospective employees, how can they be using AI to effectively to find the jobs that they want, to find the companies that are going to be the right fit, to really show themselves as being the right person for that job, because it's not evident.
It's not. And it's very hard to give a good answer on that because it's in such a state of flux. I think the first thing to point out is AI is everywhere and everybody's using it, even if they think they're not, because the algorithms that show you the jobs that respond, it's in LinkedIn Recruiter, it's in every web search, AI is there. And there's an extent to which it's making us stupider because it's pre-filtering so much. When we used to Google stuff as a verb, we used to get pages of results. We could see the top 10 results even before they stuffed it full of ads at the top. If you ask AI for something, you get one answer. And it's almost like it's done that job for you. So you have to go beyond prompting. You have to get under the hood. You have to look beyond the first answer that it gives you. And that might mean varying your searches. That might mean try something logged out and look at it from another angle and so on to really do your research. It can be an amazing tool, but it can also do a lot of the thinking for you because of the way it's configured. And so sometimes you need to step outside that altogether and log out of your LinkedIn and see what it looks like, and search logged out of Google, your main accounts and so on, and see. It's also good for finding out about you, actually, what's being found about you, is to make sure you're logged out of stuff. But yes, another thing on AI is it's really important to master it, because there is not a remote job now that won't have you using AI in some form. So you need to demonstrate that competency. It might not be listed in the job description, but you need to be able to address it confidently. This is how I use it. This is how I don't use it. This is what I've learned. This is how I've learned. This is how I've explored the learning process.
So including it on your CV
Include
as well.
It because whether it's an admin job or a customer service job or something, AI is going to show up. And it could be that whole customer service team is now 2 people rather than 10 because of AI. And so they need someone who's confident with it, who knows how to use it. It's absolutely vital that your application itself does not smell of AI. That you are not using it to write your CV. No, you're not using it to write your cover letter. Use it to research exactly what should be in there. But I've spoken to recruiters who've said, I cannot tell these 100 cover letters apart because they're all jumbles of the same phrases. Because if you feed your CV and the job description into ChatGPT and say, write me a cover letter, it's going to write an almost identical cover letter for everyone giving it that same job description. It's pulling direct phrases out of it. And the recruiters, if it even gets to a human, and it might well get there because it's passing the filters, check that, and that experience. But then they look at it and they can't see you at all in there. And so they need to be able to see you, and they need to be able to go to your LinkedIn profile and say, yes, there's a human. I can see how they write, how they express themselves. I can see photos of them in their home office. I can see that they're using this kind of gear, that they can write, because that's still a basic competency of remote communication, is being able to express yourself in a written form. I've had people say to me, don't write a book that's that thick. And think, well, actually, I would sell more books if I made it a comic or a graphic novel or something, or a TikTok. But in fact, if people can't read a book, it's unlikely they're going to wind up in a fully remote senior knowledge-based role, because you have to be able to read. You have to be able to engage with text still. And people could scrape the DRM and shove the whole ebook into a large language model and say, give me the gist of remote readiness. But actually, and they will. And, I know that I've already seen, even in my own interactions with AI, I can see my stuff coming back at me. Okay, that's fine.
That's fine.
Can't be precious about that. It's out there. It's
out there, and as long as it's presenting it back to you with sufficient accuracy about particular points.
Yeah, I think so. For people who are trying to stand out, and in the recruitment process, you've got to stand out. These truly remote, fully remote work from anywhere positions, where an employer is prepared to work with an EOR or to contract with you as a consultant. If they want you that much, then they are going to get possibly thousands of applications. So to pass that first filter, you really need to stand out. Ideally, you need to have a relationship with them already online. You need to be following them. You need to be engaging with them. They need to be able to look at your LinkedIn profile and instantly see where you would fit in their organization, where you would fit in terms of that role and what it's demanding. So there's so much to get past. And then when you get to the interview stage, you have that whole other layer. And then you can move on to actually showing how you could contribute to the culture.
What do you mean about cultural fit and how that needs to maybe be updated for these current times?
I think it's a little bit like getting AI to do your CV or something. It can end up with very little sense of individual. I think if people try to overfit to what they see online as a company culture, it can come off as you don't stand out, and it can also seem inauthentic. Whereas I think it's better to take all of that on board, acknowledge it, settle into it, but then to show you and where you would fit would add to it. In a small organization, a small medium organization, every single person that joins it changes it to some extent. And every manager hiring somebody for a team they know well is aware that this new person is going to bring something new. The dynamic will shift. And so they need to see, it's almost, if you look like you fit too closely, yes, they can do the job. They're motivated to do the job, and they're going to slot right in. That's great, but it's almost unreal because they will change the team dynamic in some way. So,
you want to have a bit of cognitive diversity.
You do,
with an addition to the team. Yeah,
you want to challenge the people who are already there. You want to improve the team. You want to, you want to bring things that aren't there already, whether that's somebody who is a different demographic, a different generation, a different ethnicity, a different neurological approach. There are so many things that, and yes, it would be simpler and more comfortable to require somebody who's not going to challenge anything and it's going to slot right in. But actually, most people who are leading truly remote teams embrace that difference to a greater extent, I think. The people who've mastered that intentionality of leading distributed teams actually really celebrate what new people can bring.
They can actually see how very different people are, because that's when it shows up in a distributed team. And so if you're really doing working with a fully remote, very distributed team, or hybrid, and being successful, it really is understanding and celebrating how different each person is to get the most, so they can perform at their best. Maya, what haven't I asked you that is important for people to understand about remote working from the employer and or an employee or contractor point of view, in terms of where remote work is now, where it is going, and how to approach it to help remote working be effective?
I think we touched on this, but it's worth revisiting, is that remote work is different to the established norms, and therefore it's harder in many ways. It's harder to find a remote job because the supply vastly fails to measure up to the demand. The reason for that is because for employers, it's much easier for them to carry on as they were if they're traditional. For both sides, though, it's so worth it to break that mold, to do the work, to figure out how to lead your team properly in a distributed way. You'll get so much more from them, and you'll get so much more from your own life as a leader, as a manager. And as a job seeker, it's much easier to find a job down the road because they're only recruiting from people in your town.
Yeah.
So you can resign yourself to that. You can pick the town and then find the job and stay there. Or you can tackle this on a countrywide or even a global level and really try to find the best job for you in the whole world, where you will have the greatest satisfaction and experience and productivity and flow. Of course, that's going to be harder, but just consider the rewards that can bring. And it's worth doing the work. And there's a lot of work. Buying a book won't get you a remote job. And there are exercises in every chapter, reflection, that you need to think this through. This is how are you going to put this into your application? How are you going to show this in your public profiles? How are you going to show this at every stage? Because it's all has to be on you as the job seeker to show that you're ready for this. If you've never done it before, great. If you've had a fully remote role for the last 3 years, that's a huge advantage in your CV, but most people haven't. So you need to be able to show you have the competencies, you have the qualities.
And people aren't used to identifying what those specific attributes are that are best, that need to be included now in the CV in order to be able to communicate clearly and easily, I am ready for this job. Yes. I'm going to hit the ground and be running very soon. Maya, thank you so much. I very much believe in workplace flexibility is everything that I've talked about and know about for so long. And remote working, whether it is full-time or part of the time or over the course of one's many careers, it's going to come in and come out depending on different situations, whether it's to do with health, to do with family, to do whatever it might be, choice, exploration. Remote work is here. It has been here for a long time, and it is certainly going to stay. So the more that we can understand and do it well and position ourselves well as employers and employees and contract workers, the better. So thank you so much for everything that you shared. And there'll be a link in the show notes so that people can find your new book, the new one for workers, as well as a link for the old book, the first book, which was for employers. So thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me and for all that you do to shine a light on these vital topics.
Thanks again so much to Maya Middlemiss, founder of Remote Work Europe. You can find out more about Maya on LinkedIn, as well as go to remotework.eu. Immediate action tip. Remote working is different to previous traditional working norms. So there is a learning period as a remote worker or managing a distributed team. However, the rewards are significant, so it's worth the effort. Are you looking for personalized insights to address your priority issues for Q1 2026? Sign up for a complimentary introductory 20-minute executive coaching session with me to talk through how best to approach your situation. Go to modernworklife.co to find out more. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, share it with a friend, or write a quick review wherever you watch or listen. For more curated, useful insights, research, and information, you can sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter on Substack or LinkedIn. Thanks for watching. See you next time.